Hi, everyone. My name is Jose, and I work as a guide for the Central Park Conservancy. On behalf of everyone here, I'd like to welcome you all on our weekly walk through the Great Hill. Okay, so just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. All participants are muted, but you can use the chat function to say hello or maybe comment. If you have any questions, you can try using the Q&A feature, and my colleagues, Juan, Ian, and Ryan, they're going to answer any questions as we go along. Now, the images that you folks are going to be seeing today, these were taken by myself within the past week, but you'll also see some historic images. And these are going to be taken from the photo archives of the Library of Congress, the New York Public Library, the New York Historic Society, and the Museum of the City of New York. I'm also going to be using some images from our official Central Park Conservancy archives. Now, closed captioning has also been enabled for accessibility for folks who are hard of hearing. If you're on a laptop or PC and you don't want to see the captions, simply press live transcript and then press hide subtitle. If you're on a cell phone, tablet, iPad, or other mobile device, you'll need to change your settings on Zoom. And my colleagues will post directions in the chat on how to go about doing that. Okay, so our official mission here at the Conservancy is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. Basically, as many of you know, we work to maintain Central Park and keep it clean and green year-round, and we've been hard at work since 1980. Okay, so before we begin, let's go over our route for today. We're going to be making our way along the northwest corner of the park. So we'll start off at 7th Avenue and 110th Street, and then we're going to head west. And after passing under the 110th Street Bridge, we'll head south along the pathways and climb the gentle slope leading up towards the Great Hill. And then we'll explore the glades and the meadows of that area before we end things off. So let's actually go ahead and start off right here at the northern end of the park at the corner of 110th Street and 7th Avenue, also known as Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard, named after the first African-American congressman from the neighborhood of Harlem. Now, he was elected in 1945, and he served for almost 30 years. Starting in the 1920s, Harlem was basically the cultural capital of Black life in America. And today, the north end of Central Park is still an important public space for those who live in this vibrant community. Okay, so right now we're going to make our way through this gate and we're going to explore the northern edges of the park. Now, I took these images last week right at the end of a pretty nasty rainstorm. So you're going to see lots of clouds and puddles on this walk, but not a whole lot of people. Usually there'll be tons and tons of crowds out and about here. And while I was making my way through, I saw this relatively young bald cypress tree. Now, it's still only just a few years old, but these trees can grow up to 120 feet tall, making this one just a little small, tiny baby. Sometimes after rainstorms, these can actually knock down some of the trees in the park, like it actually did just a few days ago, right after we had this big particular storm here in New York City. But when one tree falls, our crews are, of course, always standing by to plant a new one. I like to think of it as the circle of life here in Central Park. And one interesting thing about the bald cypress is that they're actually in the same plant family as the giant sequoias and redwoods of California. And you can actually see that here in the needles. So these are going to be what's called coniferous trees, meaning they have seed-bearing cones. And they basically stay green throughout the year. I happen to really appreciate the trees of Central Park. We're going to be taking a look at lots of other ones in our walk for today. All right, so moving on now, and we're going to keep heading west along the pathway just south of the walls of 110th Street. Over on the left, you can actually see one of the many rock outcrops that make the north end such a hilly section of the park. This one's actually kind of a curious looking rock. So right down the middle, you can see a bit of a gap separating it in two. Kids really love to play on this rock, and sometimes you're going to see them hiding behind this gap. The north end also has many of these types of rocky outcrops, and some of them, like this one, they create some really fascinating shapes. And just down the pathway, We're going to pass the playground over on the left-hand side. And this, of course, is used by the children and families from the local communities of Harlem, Morningside Heights, and the Upper West Side. So we're going to go ahead and make a left turn right after this playground. And right up ahead, we come to what's called the 110th Street Bridge. It's also known as Mount Cliff Arch, according to some older sources. Now, it was built in the 1890s to basically provide carriage access to and from the entrance onto the main drive of the park. And passing underneath, you really get a sense of just how large this bridge really is. Now, this is going to stand at 48 feet high. It's basically the tallest arch in all of Central Park, as well as its northernmost. Now, this stone marble is primarily made out of gneiss and ashlar, and its rustic design makes it really blend quite well with the rocky landscape around it. I also happen to think that it's a very fitting segue towards the next section of our walk. Now, this trail, this is going to take us south from the northwest entrance of the park. And as you can see, it's a bit more natural and quiet around here. And basically, this forms kind of like part of the greater Northwoods section. Walking through here definitely can be a bit of a respite from the hustle and the bustle of New York City. So you're definitely going to see lots of plant life around here. You're going to see lots of trees. And of course, right on top of this rock, you can even see a shagbark hickory tree. The shagbark hickory is, of course, native to the east coast of the United States. You pretty much find it in all over New York State in various parks, in forests and things like that. Now, if we take a close look at this shagbark hickory, you might be able to see why it's called that. It's going to have this very distinctive bark that peels in long, tough curls right off the main trunk. Now, if you're a fan of grilling or barbecuing during the summertime, then you know that hickory wood is great for giving your food that fine, smoky flavor. It also has these very delicious nuts that were really quite an important source of food for the native Algonquin people. Now, at the end of this wooded trail, we come to some steps leading up towards the ground level and then eventually up towards the hill. I also saw this fence with a sign telling park goers to stay off the newly seeded lawn. With more than 843 acres of parkland to maintain, we here at the Conservancy, we work hard to keep it as beautiful as it can be. And it's important for all visitors to, of course, do their part and respect the landscape. All right, so from this intersection, we're going to go ahead and keep heading up the slope towards the top of the Great Hill. And along the way, we're going to look at some of the lovely trees in this section of the park. And just off to the left of the pathway, you're going to find the big leaves of the northern red oak, which is actually a very common tree to plant because of their attractive fall foliage color. It's also one of the more common trees that we have here in the park, and you can find pretty much hundreds of these types of trees spread throughout the park. But I do find them really quite fascinating because their leaves are generally larger than most of the common pin oaks you're going to find here in the park. As you can see, this one is actually much larger than my hand. I also really like the northern red oak because it's the state tree of my home state of New Jersey. All right, and just a few steps down from the red oak, we find this sassafras tree, which is, of course, really quite unique because it's got multiple leaf shapes within the same tree. So you can actually see a few of these shapes right now, right where the arrows are pointing towards. Okay, so now let's go ahead and pause right here and we'll conduct our poll of the day. All right, so you should see a poll pop up on your screen right now. So basically, we've taken a look at a few trees so far. And right now, I do want to ask, what is your favorite type of tree? Or do you have a favorite type of tree? Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot more than the ones I've listed on here. There's going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of them spread worldwide. These are just some of the more common varieties that you'll find in most parks here in the northeastern United States. So there's going to be all sorts of oaks, maples, elms, pines, cypresses, cherries, willow trees. Of course, if you can't find your favorite on this list, definitely let us know in the chat. We'd love to hear some of your favorites. Probably one of my favorite would be the sugar maple, of course, the state tree of New York. All right, so it looks like most of us has already voted. So I'm going to go ahead and end off the poll right now. All right, so here are the results. It looks like, yep, most of us have chosen the maples, also one of my favorite. A lot of us also like willows, cherries, oaks, pines. And of course, we see on the chat, lots of folks have kind of put in their 2 cents. A lot of folks also like cherry trees. The London plane tree is another good one as well. Basically, lots and lots and lots of trees here in Central Park. All right, so let's go ahead and continue on. So from the tree-lined slope, we're going to keep following this pathway towards our destination. Okay, so right after walking to the northwest corner of the park, we now arrive at the Great Hill. So let's now go ahead and kind of explore this landscape. Now, as you can see here, the Great Hill really doesn't seem like it's much of a hill at first glance. It's actually relatively flat at the top. The Great Hill is actually more of a meadow surrounded by trees and open glades around it. And at some point, you kind of forget that it's an actual hill. But despite that, it's still very much a high point in the park. And there can actually be some pretty fine views here, especially in the colder months. So here in this photo from autumn, the very much understated beauty of the landscape really shines through, especially when the trees are really starting to become more bare. Now, this photo was taken from a rocky outcrop on one of the sloping glades, and you can really get a sense here of just how high up the elevation can be. The Great Hill stands at about 135 feet, making it the 3rd highest natural point in all of Central Park. In fact, when park designers Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux were creating the park in the 1850s, they really wanted this area to serve as a carriage concourse where riders could stop and enjoy the views, back when you could still see all the way out towards the Hudson River and towards New Jersey in the west, or towards Long Island in the east. And in this illustration from 1857, you can really get a sense of just how stunning the views would have been back then. Now, this is going to be looking east, and because there were a lot less trees and vegetation here in the 1850s, you can see the East River and the rolling hills of what was at that point in time rural Queens County. By the way, back then the Great Hill was called Mount Prospect because of the excellent vistas. You can actually see that right down here at the bottom. It says view from Mount Prospect. And before the 19th century, this was going to be the site of a British encampment during the American Revolution, as you can see on this topographic map from 1984. All right, so back to the modern day. After turning right at the intersection, we're going to keep following the path. And right at the center of the Great Hill, you're going to find this vast grassy meadow. Now, on a busy day, you're going to find lots of people here just kind of taking advantage of the large open space. Today, it's pretty quiet because of the rain. You're also going to find some outcrops of Manhattan schist right at the center of the meadow. Now, this would, of course, make an excellent spot for a picnic or maybe for just sitting and relaxing. Or if you're a robin or any other type of bird, it also makes for a nice spot to have a bath, especially right after a big rainstorm. All right, and back on the main pathway now, and you'll notice that it's actually made out of gravel. If you like jogging, then you know that running on gravel is great if you want a different experience than, say, maybe hard pavement or concrete. Gravel running is also easier on the knees for some runners, and for that reason, you'll often see joggers here making several loops around the Great Hill. Of course, if you get too tired from your run, you can always rest here on one of the many benches around the pathway. Now, at some point along the way on your run or your walk, you're going to see this hidden trail along the main gravel path. And if we follow it, you can see that it leads towards a grassy clearing right in the middle of a wooded area. So this is what's called the Peter J. Sharp Children's Glade. This rustic open area contains some stone and tree trunk seating where families can pretty much just kind of gather for storytelling. There's music and theater workshops here sometimes, and there's also dance performances as well. Now, this area is a bit more quiet and private than the rest of the Great Hill, simply because it's situated behind quite a bit of vegetation. Now, the trees around here would include dogwoods, tulip trees, pitch pines, and chestnut oaks, which are all, of course, native to the state of New York. You're also going to see shrubs and flowering plants here of all kinds. All right, and moving on from the Children's Glade, we head back onto the main gravel path. Now, even though the rain kept most visitors away on this walk, you can bet that the Great Hill can be quite a busy place, especially when the sun is out. There are, of course, plenty of activities to do up here, including picnicking, yoga, sunbathing, or just simply relaxing on the grass with a good book. All right, so today we've explored some of the interesting trees and plant life around the Great Hill. Now, one magnificent thing about this area is that it's going to be dotted with lots and lots of American elms, which are, of course, a favorite tree of ours here in Central Park. I think they really do add a perfect aura to this beautiful, romantic landscape. So we're going to go ahead and end things off right here under the shade of this particular American elm, where you get this lovely, idyllic view of the meadow with the Upper West Side in the background. These days, the Great Hill is the perfect place for just escaping the everyday stresses of New York City. All right, and with that, I thank you all so much for joining me on our weekly walk. Don't forget to check out some of our in-person programs as well if you've not yet done so. We're now offering guided walking tours of areas like the North Woods, Belvedere Castle, Seneca Village, 72nd Street, and the statues and monuments of Bethesda Terrace and the mall. So I'm going to go ahead and keep the room open for any last final questions. And of course, from all of us here at the Central Park Conservancy, stay safe and be well. Have a good day, folks.